He wasn't a household name, but maybe he should have been. Long before Motown became a sound, there was a young man in Detroit who could already hear it in the rhythm of the streets, in the laughter of his neighbors, and in the dreams echoing from every corner bar. He didn't have fame, or fortune, or even recognition. What he had was vision, the kind that could turn simple melodies into the heartbeat of a generation. His name was Billy Davis, a songwriter, a producer, a quiet pioneer who helped shape the music that changed America. Let's get into his story right now. Grab a warm drink, sit back, and take this journey with me. Detroit, 1932. The city was alive with rhythm, the sound of engines from the auto plants blending with the hum of gospel choirs and street corner harmonies. It was a place where hard work met heart, where dreams were made from sweat and song. And in a small neighborhood on the city's west side, a boy named Roquel Billy Davis was learning to turn that noise into music. He grew up in a large family that understood struggle but never lost its sense of joy. On summer nights, the streets came alive with laughter and the voices of young singers chasing harmony under the streetlights. Billy was one of them. He didn't yet know what a career in music meant, he only knew that sound made him feel free. At Northern High School, Billy showed a natural gift for melody. Teachers remembered a boy who could hear a tune once and play it back on piano with ease. Later, at Wayne State University and the Maurice King School of Music, he began to study composition and arrangement. Yet the real lessons were still out there on the sidewalks, in the clubs, and inside the restless heartbeat of Detroit itself. The city was changing. The early 1950 saw the rise of doo-wop groups, neighborhood talent shows, and a new kind of hope pulsing through African-American communities. Every corner had a group rehearsing their next big song, every church a choir that could lift the walls. Billy joined in, learning not only the music but the spirit behind it, the belief that even the forgotten could be heard if they sang loud enough. He soon connected with a cousin, Lawrence Payton, who shared his ambition. Together they formed a group called the Four Aims. Billy wasn't just a performer, he became their manager, their arranger, their driving force. He helped them record a demo tape that carried his original songs, Kiss Me Baby, Could It Be You, and All My Life. That tape traveled from Detroit to Chicago, landing on the desk of the legendary Chess Records. Chess was impressed not by the group, but by the man behind the songs. They signed the Four Aims to a brief contract in 1956, renaming them the Four Tops to avoid confusion with another act. But the single didn't take off. Within months, the group returned to Detroit, and Billy found himself back at the beginning. Still, he didn't see it as failure. Chess had noticed something in him that Detroit hadn't yet the spark of a true songwriter. Back home, he continued to write and experiment. Detroit's music scene was intimate, small clubs filled with big voices. On any given night, you could find a mix of jazz players, gospel singers, and kids with dreams bigger than the stage they stood on. Billy listened to them all. He learned that songs weren't just made of chords and lyrics, they were built from life, from the stories of people trying to make something out of nothing. That's when fate stepped in the form of Gwen Gordy, a young woman with deep roots in Detroit's musical circles. She was vibrant, ambitious, and full of ideas. Their connection was instant, personal, and creative. Gwen introduced Billy to her brother, Barry Gordy Jr., who was also trying to make his mark as a songwriter. None of them could have imagined that this meeting would quietly set the stage for one of the most powerful music revolutions in American history. By then, Billy had learned to balance patience with persistence. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing a sound, one that felt honest, soulful, and alive. Detroit gave him everything he needed to find it: struggle, rhythm, and community. The same streets that built cars were building dreams, and Billy Davis was ready to drive his straight into history. Before the fame, before the credits, before the world ever heard of Motown, there was just a young man standing under a flickering streetlight, humming a tune that only he could hear. By the mid-1950, Detroit was buzzing with possibility. The air was thick with ambition. Every block had a songwriter, every corner a singer waiting to be discovered. Billy Davis had already learned that talent alone wasn't enough. You needed connections, belief, and a little bit of luck. That's when he met Gwen Gordy. Gwen was unlike anyone he had known, sharp, creative, and deeply rooted in Detroit's growing network of black musicians. She believed that music could be more than entertainment. It could be identity. The two of them connected instantly, both personally and artistically. They would stay up late at night in small apartments, writing lyrics on napkins and humming melodies into cheap tape recorders. For Billy, this wasn't romance, it was revelation. Through Gwen, he met her brother, Barry Gordy. Junior Barry was a factory worker at the time, writing songs between shifts at the Lincoln Mercury plant. He had a fire in his eyes, the same one Billy carried, but Barry thought like a businessman, while Billy thought like a poet. Together, they became a balance of vision and practicality, melody and motion. Detroit's independent music scene was still in its infancy. Major labels ignored black artists unless they could be molded into something acceptable. Billy and Barry wanted none of that. They wanted the raw emotion, the sound that came from the streets, from the church, from the heart. They began to write for local acts, young singers trying to break out of the neighborhood circuit. Their songs carried that unmistakable blend of joy and ache, the soul of Detroit. Billy's understanding of harmony and rhythm began to shape what would later be called the Motown Sound. He was precise but emotional, disciplined yet deeply human. He'd sit at an upright piano with Gwen beside him, humming the top line while Barry worked out a bass groove that made people move without even realizing it. Together, they wrote songs that weren't just catchy, they were alive. As money started to trickle in from small local sales, Billy learned his next big lesson: success could divide as quickly as it united. Even among friends, the question of who owned what became complicated. But at that time, none of them were thinking about royalties or contracts. They were just three dreamers in Detroit building something they couldn't yet name. By the end of the decade, Billy was earning respect among local musicians as a man with the ear. He could listen to a rough melody and instantly hear where it should go, who should sing it, what emotion it should carry. That rare gift made him invaluable. He wasn't just writing songs, he was building bridges, connecting artists, producers, and sounds that had never met before. Detroit in those years wasn't glamorous. The city lights flickered over cracked sidewalks and crowded bars, but to Billy, they looked like stage lights. Every night he walked home past the old auto plants, the machines still humming inside. To most people, it was just noise, but to him, it was rhythm. It was life turning into music. Every street light in Detroit flickered like a note, and Billy was learning how to turn light into sound. The late 1950 brought new energy to Detroit. Rock and roll was shaking the airwaves, but deep in the heart of the city, something softer, richer, and more human was being born. Billy Davis, Gwen Gordy, and Barry Gordy Jr. were no longer just dreamers. They were becoming architects of a new sound, one that blended the gospel emotion of Black America with the structure of pop. It was the voice of a new generation, and it started with one name, Jackie Wilson. Under the pen name Tyron Carlo, Billy joined Barry in writing for Wilson, whose electrifying stage presence was redefining soul music. Together, they created songs that became anthems. Lonely Teardrops, That's Why I Love You So, To Be Loved. Each track carried the unmistakable pulse of Billy's writing melodies that felt joyful and aching at the same time. When Wilson sang, people danced. But when he paused, they felt something deeper, a longing that came straight from Billy's pen. For a brief moment, success tasted sweet. Their songs climbed the charts, the radio spun them daily, and record executives finally started to take notice. But the music business was ruthless, and soon came the reminder that art didn't always equal ownership. When payments stopped coming for their hits, Billy and Barry realized they were being cut out. Managers, publishers, everyone wanted a piece of the pie, except for the ones who baked it. Billy later said, "We didn't even know if we were supposed to be paid." That single sentence summed up what it meant to be a black songwriter in America at the time, genius without credit. The fallout forced them to move differently. In 1958, Billy and Gwen decided to start something of their own, Anna Records, named after Gwen's sister. It was more than a label. It was a declaration of independence. The following year, Barry followed with Tamla Records, which would soon evolve into Motown. The two companies worked side by side for a while, sharing artists, producers, and the same relentless dream of giving black music its rightful place in the mainstream. Billy's songs began to travel further. You Got What It Takes by Marv Johnson, Who Wouldn't Love a Man Like That by Mabel John, and the first singles by the Miracles. He wasn't just writing hits, he was helping to shape an entire movement. Yet, as Motown grew into an empire, Billy's name began to fade quietly into the background. He wasn't part of the headlines or the glossy record covers, but his fingerprints were everywhere. Even after his partnership with Berry Gordy faded, the sound they built together never left him. It was in the rhythm, the phrasing, the emotional honesty of every Motown song that followed. Billy Davis had helped light the fuse. The explosion simply carried his name away with the smoke. While the world remembered Motown, few remembered the man who gave it its heartbeat. By 1960, Billy Davis had become one of those rare figures who could move through the music world quietly yet leave deep footprints behind. When Chess Records came calling, he didn't hesitate. The label was legendary home to the raw power of blues giants, like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. But the Chess brothers wanted something new. They wanted to evolve. They wanted soul, and Billy Davis was the man who could give it to them. He moved to Chicago, a city whose rhythm was different from Detroit. Here, the sound wasn't built in garages or street corners, it came from smoky clubs, from the bass lines that rolled through late-night radio, from the ache in a singer's voice after a long week of shows. Billy walked into that world with quiet confidence, carrying his Detroit sensibility and his deep belief that music should make people feel first and think later. As the new A&R director for Chess, Billy began assembling a team of writers, producers, and musicians who understood that feeling. He wasn't chasing hits, he was building a sound. His sessions were legendary for their warmth and precision. Artists said he had a way of listening that made them better. He didn't just hear what you sang, he heard what you meant. Under his direction, Chess Records began to shift. The label known for 12-bar blues was now pulsing with rhythm and melody. Billy produced or co-wrote songs for Etta James, The Dells, Billy Stewart, Jackie Ross, and countless others. Each artist carried a piece of his vision, that perfect marriage between gospel's passion and pop's clarity. In 1965, his instincts led to one of the most defining songs of the decade, Rescue Me, sung by Fontella Bass. From the opening bass line to Bass's commanding voice, the record had everything Billy had been chasing for years: emotion, movement, and truth. The song raced up the charts, becoming a symbol of freedom and feminine strength wrapped in soul. Many said it sounded just like Motown. Billy smiled at that. In a way, it was the soul of Motown, filtered through his own lens, matured and reborn in Chicago. Success followed, but Billy carried it lightly. He preferred the studio to the spotlight, the piano bench to the stage. While others celebrated in front of cameras, he stayed behind the mixing board, fine-tuning harmonies until every note felt like it belonged to the story. His name wasn't on every cover, but his sound was in every groove. By the mid-1960, he had quietly helped transform Chess into one of America's most respected soul labels. He had done what few could, bridge the worlds of blues and pop without losing the heart of either. In a city known for grit, Billy Davis had found grace, and in doing so, he had finally reached the height of his creative power, not as a star, but as the man behind them all. He didn't crave the spotlight. He built it for others to shine. For a man who had built his career on helping others shine, Billy Davis was beginning to understand the cost of being invisible. By the mid-1960, his records were climbing the charts, his artists were touring the world, and his sound was everywhere. But very few people outside the studio even knew his name. That quiet anonymity, once a badge of humility, began to feel like a cage. Chicago was thriving, but the music industry was shifting. Rock was taking over, record executives were chasing youth trends, and the golden age of soul was starting to feel uncertain. Inside Chess Records, the atmosphere changed. What had once been a family of musicians now felt like a factory of hits. Billy stayed calm through it all, mentoring younger producers, encouraging artists to hold on to authenticity, but part of him was growing restless. He had spent more than a decade proving that soul could live anywhere: Detroit, Chicago, or beyond. Yet the business around him was beginning to care less about soul and more about numbers. He would walk through the corridors of Chess late at night, hearing the echoes of unfinished songs, bits of melody, laughter, the ghost of a rhythm. To him, that sound was beautiful, but to the label, it was just product waiting to be sold. There were moments when he considered starting his own label again, the way he had with Anna Records years before. But the music world was no longer the same. The barriers for black creators were still there, only painted with new colors, contracts, distribution deals, corporate control. Billy knew that art and ownership rarely shared the same room. Then came the offer that would change everything. In 1968, the global advertising agency McCann Erickson reached out to him. They had heard his work, the way his songs connected emotion to memory, and they wanted him to bring that magic to the world of commercials. It was an unexpected invitation, one that made even his friends question him. Why would a man who helped shape the sound of Motown and chess trade all that for jingles? But Billy didn't see it that way. To him, a song was a message, whether it played in a nightclub or during a 30-second TV spot. If people are listening, he once said, then the music still matters. He accepted the job and packed for New York, leaving behind the comfort of the studio and the city that had defined his career. As the train pulled out of Chicago, he looked out at the skyline, the smoke, the lights, the memory of every note he'd ever written. He wasn't running away. He was searching for a new way to be heard. He had spent years helping others find their sound. Now it was time to find his own. He didn't leave music. He just found a new stage no one could see yet. When Billy Davis arrived in New York in 1968, the city moved at a different rhythm. It wasn't the soulful pulse of Detroit or the bluesy heartbeat of Chicago. It was faster, colder, ruled by deadlines and dollar signs. For the first time in his life, Billy wasn't surrounded by musicians. He was surrounded by executives in gray suits, talking about markets, slogans, and brand identity. The studio was now a conference room. The audience was a board of directors. At McCann Erickson, one of the largest advertising agencies in the world, Billy was hired to bring soul to commercial music. But for many inside the company, his presence raised eyebrows. A black producer from the world of R&B, writing jingles for soda and cereal? It sounded absurd to them. They didn't understand that the same rhythm that moved a crowd on Saturday night could sell a product on Monday morning. Billy did. The first few months were rough. He'd propose melodies infused with gospel chords, layered with emotion, only to be told they were too soulful or too heavy. One executive reportedly said, "We're selling happiness, not heartache." Billy smiled and replied, "Sometimes they're the same thing." That quiet defiance defined his new chapter, the belief that emotion, even in advertising, could still mean something. He began working with a small team who believed in him, experimenting with ways to make commercial jingles sound like pop songs. He treated each 30-second spot as if it were a record writing verses, hooks, and bridges that told a complete story. Slowly, the resistance started to fade. People began to notice that when Billy's music played, people didn't just listen, they felt something. Then, in 1971, he created something that would change the world of advertising forever. Inspired by a song titled Mom, True Love, and Apple Pie, Billy and his team reworked it into a simple, heartfelt melody. "I'd like to buy the world a Coke." At first, the jingle didn't make much noise. It aired on the radio and quickly disappeared. But when it was turned into a television commercial showing a hillside full of young people from around the world singing together, the response was overwhelming. The message was universal: hope, unity, connection. The commercial didn't just sell soda. It sold the idea of harmony. For Billy, it was proof that music could transcend industry lines. What started as a small assignment had become a cultural moment. Yet, even as his melody spread across the globe, few people knew who wrote it. He'd once been the architect of Motown Sound. Now, he was the unseen voice behind one of the most famous jingles in American history. He gave the world a song, and once again, the world forgot his name. The success of "I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke" opened doors Billy Davis never expected. Overnight, the advertising world began to see music differently. What had once been a simple jingle was now a piece of pop culture that spoke to unity, hope, and a shared dream. Billy became the man who had given emotion a commercial language. Yet, as the applause echoed in boardrooms, he found himself in unfamiliar territory, fame without a face. McCann Erickson quickly promoted him to senior vice president and music director, a historic achievement for a black man in corporate America at that time. He now oversaw campaigns for global brands: Coca-Cola, Miller Beer, Sony, Nabisco, shaping how millions experienced sound in everyday life. His fingerprints were everywhere. It's the real thing. Have a Coke and a smile. Coke is it. Every line carried that same warmth, that same soul, his soul. But behind the success, a quiet sadness lingered. Billy had always believed that music was meant to heal, to connect. Now it was being used to sell. The world still sang his melodies, but not his name. When people hummed his tunes on their morning commute or in grocery stores, no one asked who wrote them. And for an artist who had spent decades giving others their sound, that anonymity began to weigh heavy. Still, Billy found ways to keep meaning alive. He introduced Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles to the world of advertising, convincing executives that true artistry could elevate a brand more than any slogan. Those collaborations didn't just sell products, they broke barriers. Black voices were finally being heard, not as caricatures, but as culture. Through it all, Billy remained the same gentle visionary. He didn't boast. He didn't seek credit. He worked quietly, often arriving early and staying late, crafting jingles that captured small human moments, laughter, comfort, nostalgia. To him, that was still art, just a different kind. By the late 1980s, his career had come full circle. He had written songs that shaped Motown, produced records that defined chess, and now created jingles that lived in the collective memory of America. But in the silence after the meetings, in the quiet of his New York apartment, he sometimes wondered if anyone truly knew who he was. He had given the world soundtracks to its joy, from dance floors to living rooms, yet his own story played out off stage. That was Billy Davis, the man whose music everyone knew, but whose name no one remembered. When the cameras stopped rolling, the silence in his life became deafening. By the early 2000s, Billy Davis had quietly become one of the most influential yet least recognized figures in American music history. His melodies had lived for decades in people's minds, from record players to television screens, yet few connected those sounds to the man who wrote them. His work had moved from street corners in Detroit to living rooms across the world. Without ever seeking fame, he had achieved something greater: immortality through memory. The jingles he created for Coca-Cola had long outlived their campaigns. It's the real thing. Have a Coke and a smile. And Coke is it weren't just slogans, they were emotional moments in sound. They captured an optimism that America wanted to believe in. The way people once sang along to Jackie Wilson or Etta James, they now hummed Billy's melodies without even realizing it. His music had become part of the national heartbeat. What made Billy different wasn't just his ability to write a tune. It was his understanding of emotion. He knew how to build a song around the feeling of togetherness, something that transcended genre, race, and generation. Even in advertising, he refused to treat music as background noise. Every chord, every note had to mean something. It had to tell the truth. And in doing so, he blurred the lines between commerce and culture, turning jingles into art. Artists and producers who came after him, from Quincy Jones to Berry Gordy himself, often spoke of Billy's quiet genius. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was often the one who shaped it. For young black creatives in the industry, his story became a quiet beacon, proof that success didn't always come with applause. It could come through endurance, craftsmanship, and an unshakable belief in what music could do for people. He also used his influence to open doors for others. In an era when very few black artists were trusted with major corporate campaigns, Billy's leadership helped change that. By bringing Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, and other soul legends into advertising, he didn't just sell products, he sold dignity. He showed America that the same voice that moved your heart could also sell your soda, and that neither diminished the other. For Billy, legacy was never about credit. It was about contribution. He often said that if people remembered the feeling his music gave them, that was enough. And they did. From the streets of Detroit to the skyscrapers of New York, his sound lived on in voices, in memories, in moments of connection too small to name but too real to forget. He turned jingles into art, and art into history. When Billy Davis passed away on the 2nd of September 2004, the world barely noticed. There were no breaking news stories, no televised tributes, just a short obituary in the trade papers and a quiet acknowledgement from those who knew. For a man whose music had been heard by millions, his departure was marked by silence. But over time, that silence began to speak. In the years that followed, a new generation of journalists, historians, and musicians started to rediscover his work. Articles began to surface, "The man behind the sound, the hidden architect of Motown." Younger producers cited him as a pioneer, a bridge between artistry and industry. His songs and jingles were studied not just for their melody, but for their meaning, the way they carried hope, empathy, and humanity inside every note. Then, in 2007, Billy Davis was posthumously inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame. The ceremony was elegant and understated, much like the man himself. His peers spoke not only of his achievements, but of his grace. They remembered how he listened more than he spoke, how he demanded excellence without ever raising his voice. When his name appeared on the screen that night, the room stood still. It was as if the world had finally caught up to his rhythm. Across the ocean, international media began to revisit the cultural legacy of American advertising music. Many realized that Billy had done something extraordinary. He had turned marketing into a form of storytelling. His jingles weren't about selling, they were about belonging. They reflected the optimism of a nation, even when that optimism was tested. In a divided world, his melodies had made people feel, if only for 30 seconds, that they were part of something bigger. In Detroit, the city of his birth, local radio stations began playing his old work again. DJs spoke of him with pride, a hometown hero finally getting his due. "He gave us a sound," one said, "and we gave him our hearts back. A little late." Schools and community programs began using his story as a lesson that greatness doesn't always wear fame, and that sometimes the ones who change the world do it quietly. Billy Davis's legacy is both American and universal. He captured the heartbeat of a people who wanted to be heard, and in doing so, became the echo that never faded. His songs lived where memory meets melody in the spaces between generations, in the hum of nostalgia that fills the air whenever an old tune plays. He didn't just write songs. He wrote memories, even if his name never made the credits. The story of Billy Davis begins and ends with a sound. Not the roar of applause or the flash of fame, but the quiet hum of a city, the rhythm of a dream that refused to die. In the streets of Detroit, a young man once stood under a flickering streetlight, humming a tune no one else could hear. Decades later, that tune became the heartbeat of a nation, from Motown to Coca-Cola, from vinyl to television, from music to memory. Billy never chased the spotlight. He didn't need to. His work lived in the voices of others, in the joy they gave to the world. And maybe that was his greatest act of love, giving sound to the lives of people he'd never meet. Every chord he wrote carried a piece of him, a quiet truth that still echoes today. Sometimes, the most powerful voices are the ones that never shout. He turned rhythm into connection, commerce into art, and anonymity into legacy. He showed America that music could sell more than a product. It could sell an idea of who we were and who we wanted to be. His songs didn't fade when the charts changed. They simply moved into the background of our lives, becoming part of how we remember time itself. When people talk about Motown, they speak of Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson, and Marvin Gaye. But somewhere between their stories is another, the man who helped them all find their sound. Billy Davis didn't ask for credit. He just kept creating, quietly proving that greatness doesn't always need to be seen to be felt. So tonight, if you hear an old tune that makes you smile, think of him. Think of the man who turned the language of the streets into the melody of America. Because legends don't disappear. They just move to quieter stages. Do you think Billy Davis ever got the recognition he truly deserved? If stories like this move you, stay with us. Let's keep their light alive together. Because some stars never fade, they just shine where fewer eyes can see.